What if I told you there was a way to control your mind? And I'm not just talking about meditating. I'm talking about rewiring your mind for peace instead of chaos. Well, this is a conversation with Dr. Caroline Leaf, clinical neuroscientist and author of the new book, Help in a Hurry. So there's a deep connection between the mind and the brain. But Dr. Leaf sees them as distinct and separate entities. She defines the mind as a non-physical, energetic field responsible for our thoughts, emotions, and choices that drives the activity of the brain and body.
Mind is a big word that's been used for thousands of years to encapsulate things like the soul, the spirit, and all those lovely words that people use. And it's essentially you, your intelligence, how you love.
Real mental health, she argues, comes from embracing all emotions, including uncomfortable ones, and extracting their messages so we can restore balance and heal from past experiences.
It's okay to not be okay. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be depressed. It's okay to be anxious. But it's not okay to stay there. Embrace, process, and reconceptualize how you're going to move forward.
I'm Jeff Krasno, and this is the Commune podcast. As always, find me at jeffkrasno.substack.com or email me at jeffk@onecommune.com. Okay, let's dive in. Dr. Caroline Leaf, what a treat.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be with you. We did such a lovely interview just recently. I had you on my show and it was amazing.
Yeah.
I so enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think this is our first moment in four-dimensional space-time.
Exactly. Isn't it so nice to actually do the in-person? It's so much nicer than the over Zoom, I think.
So congratulations. This is your 19th book, Help in a
thank
Hurry. And, as I was going through it over the last few days, it was very elucidating because there are many places in the book where I realized that I engage so often in this kind of self-talk, and that too often really my mind is applying some sort of salience or valence to a particular phenomenon, and I'm saying to myself, God, if I'd only acted differently, so this might be regret, or what if I fail? What if people don't like the way I am, and which leads to a lot of people pleasing, and God, why am I not happier? That I should feel like a sense of constant happiness, and this was very revealing, and I think a lot of people can really relate to this kind of constant flow of anxious thinking. And as I was trying to untangle that while I was reading the book, a lot of it occurred to me that these are projections in consciousness, that they're products of the mind in some way. And I know you spend a tremendous amount of time kind of excavating the nature of the mind, the relationship between the mind and the brain. So maybe we could start there. Could you help us explain the difference between the mind and the brain, and how a lot of these emotions and thoughts begin to arise within the mind?
Well, Jeff, first of all, you summarized that beautifully, and I think it really encapsulates what as a human, what we're experiencing moment by moment and just being in life. And it's also so very normal, which is what I was trying to tell people with this book, is we live in such a society that's so driven. The current zeitgeist is so productivity focused, that creates no space for us to deal with all these thoughts. And so there's this constant pressure to, as you described so beautifully, people being anxious and people pleasing and trying to resolve all of this. And what do we do with all this chaos? So I've been in the game for 40 years. It's a long time. I've been doing research for years. I'm a clinical neuroscientist and research neuroscientist and communication pathologist. And I say that to say that I've been looking at how does the mind-brain-body connection work and what is the difference. And the interest began way back when I was a student doing my first degree, and we were having this, that's in the 80s, where they did see the distinction between the mind and the brain. And I'm going to define the two in a moment. But they didn't see the brain as being able to change. So the positive side back in that time period was that the mind and brain were seen as separate and sort of interconnected. Um, then we got to the 90s where they discovered MRI technology and so on, and suddenly everything became about the brain. And brain, as I've got some props over here, became the predominant focus. And that's what we call a neuro-reductionistic focus.
Mm.
So everything became about the brain, taking the humanness and the human element out of us as humans. And so everything that goes wrong, like those where you describe the anxious thoughts or the people pleasing, has been almost translated into, if you feel any level of discomfort, there's something wrong with your brain.
Mm.
And we've got to fix your brain, and tracking it back to the individual and the individual's brain being broken. And that has had such a bad impact on mental health. It was projected that that would improve mental health, but it's made it worse. And we see that with the statistics. So, to come back to your question, that was just kind of laying a foundation. The brain and the mind, what is the difference? Well, the mind is 99% of who you are, and that's a big claim.
Mm.
The brain is only 1% of who you are. So, the brain and the body, the fleshly part, the brain and the body, are only 1% of who we are. So the majority of who you are as a human is mind. And mind is a big word that's been used for thousands of years to encapsulate things like the soul, the spirit, and all those lovely words that people use. And it's essentially you, your intelligence, how you love, your personality, your thinking, your feeling, your choosing, your choices, your preferences, your likes, your dislikes. What makes you Jeff? What makes me Caroline? And it's so unique for each person, and it's an energetic field that now with modern science, and we can actually see that we generate an energetic field. And this is not anything weird. It's all having a
Mm.
sonogram or doing an EKG on your heart or an EEG on your brain or anything like that. That is all based on this principle of energy. How your cell phone works, how we're able to do this interview, that energy we understand now from science is the energy that the mind generates too. It's a similar electromagnetic force. So basically, it's
Mhm.
an electromagnetic force. And it appears that each of us have a unique field of energetic force, and that it's unique to each of us. And that's how we process life. And that generates this, how our desires and emotions and love and all that kind of thing. Now, that's the sort of psychological aspect of mind, and it's the fundamental aspect of who you are as a human. It's the driving force. It's the first place things begin. And then, in order for us to function as a human, we need a brain and a body. So the brain is very complex, as we know, and we're learning more and more. In the 30, 40 years I've been in the field, the advance in knowledge of understanding how the physiology of the brain works is enormous. And it's very complex, but it makes sense. It needs to be complex because we complex, our minds are complex. So we need some sort of a structure that can handle that complexity. But what's even more interesting is the fact that the body is doing as much work as the brain. So in the last 40 years, with our neuroreductionistic excitement around finding out about the brain, is we've forgotten all about the fact that the body holds just as much intelligence.
Mhm.
So when we talk about the brain and the body being 1%, what we need to understand is that the mind is everything, and it drives the brain and the body, and it makes the brain and the body work. And so when we process any kind of experience, whether it's what we were discussing before we went on camera about the impact of social media on our youth or whatever, and mental health and all these things we were discussing, all of that is processed by the mind into the brain and the body, not just the brain. So
Mm.
we've also been led to believe that it's the brain that stores our memories.
Mm.
And yet we do know that the body is also store our memories, but it's not really, when we talk about mind and things, people immediately go brain, brain, brain. Let's talk about brain health. Let's talk about brain health and longevity. It's always very much focused around the brain. But what we see from the research is that the brain will the mind processes things first. Everything goes through the mind on a psychological level and an energetic level, a physics level, scientifically physics level. Then copies of that information are made and put into the brain as a force of energy, which then affects the neurochemistry and genetics and all that stuff. And that then also copies of that are put into the body. So it's quite literally, the
Mm.
brain is a physical, it's a host, it's a receiving station, it's a way that we can connect the energy with something physical, and then that creates our ability to function as human beings.
Mm.
Simple language, think of a circle around me as being the force of my mind. and my mind is controlling all my psychological aspects. It's also making my brain work, my heart work, everything physiologically work about me. If I die, my brain and body will disintegrate because the mind is that energy force that makes the brain work, that makes the heart pump, okay, so the mind is this force that makes the body and brain work. It's also the force that enables us to experience the psychological aspects of life. So therefore, it's number one. We need to deal with that first.
Hmm.
But because of our focus on brain, and then sort of also on body, everything about mental health is very much focused around brain health, and then it lands up being food and diet and exercise and meditation, and these are all very important things,
Mm-hmm.
but they are secondary, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah. It's very interesting because I think of our fascinations with the brain or the body uh, stems from the fact that we can measure certain things, right? So you can measure your blood glucose, for example. You can
Exactly,
measure amount of
exactly.
serum serotonin in the syrup of your brain, and it leads to this kind of neuroreductionist view where you can assign a biochemical deficiency related to depression, for example, and then prescribe an SSRI for that purpose or something. Um, but I think kind of what you're getting at is that there is a greater energy field that is associated with the mind that is a kind of the master mitigator here. Am I understanding that right?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
that's a great way of saying it, a master mitigator. So it's the fundamental, it's the you-ness, it's everything about you and I being able to have this conversation and live our lives. That is mind. The
Yeah.
brain is what we're using. It's
Mhm.
it's responding.
And it's hard to put our thumb on the mind. Exactly, right? Because
It
it's
is, but
slightly ineffable.
it is, but it isn't.
Okay.
Because the brain, yes, we can physically touch the brain, we can
Hmm.
physically touch the body, and we can physically do an EKG on the heart or the EEG on the brain or something like that.
Mm.
But the mind, and then because we're so physically driven, as you already said, glucose monitoring, we always want something that looks like it's being measured. But the
Right.
most obvious measure is I'm talking to you. You're
Mm.
listening to me. We're having a discussion. You're asking questions. I'm answering them. People are listening. That's the evidence of mind. If you're
Hmm.
dead, you can't do that.
Mm.
It's not happening. Whatever spiritual belief one has, eternal life or spirituality going on with the universe, whatever, which I do believe exists. The mind, when we're in our physical body, it's the mind that's driving the whole force. So mind is we have to deal with mind first, and these levels of mind, and then we have to deal with the body too and the brain. But those, because you want your brain and your body to be healthy, so that your mind has something good to work through. So it is
Mhm.
important. But if we focus 99% of our energy on just the physical brain and the physical body, and only 1% on, oh, I'll do a little bit of stress reduction, or I'll do a little bit of meditation for this, or I'll just do that. And those are all important. But you can't just do that. You can't just do diet and exercise and then kind of squeeze in a little bit of mind. It's the other way around. It's let's work on mind,
Mhm.
and then let's work on the brain and the body. That makes sense.
Mhm.
You mentioned something as well about about measuring chemicals and serotonin,
Mhm.
and that's, that whole philosophy, which is 95% of the world believes, is actually not even accurate science. It's
That's
been
right.
totally disproved.
Yeah.
So people have been led to believe, if I feel depressed, there's an imbalance in my serotonin, and if I have this medication, it's restoring. That's not the true story. It was never proven. It was a hypothesis. It's been disproven over and over and over again, but it's something that people feel they can hang on to. But it's a gift that is empty. So initially people think, okay, well, that's why I'm feeling depressed. There's something wrong with my brain. But that backfires, because your brain can always change. It changes all the time because your mind is changing all the time. And if you feel like you've got a broken brain and you're fixed in this broken brain, it removes hope. So that philosophy is created, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's made the whole concept of mental health worse. People have got worse, not better, with that kind of philosophy.
Okay, so let's shine our microscope on the mind while we're there. And you delineate between multiple parts of the mind. So I think we're very accustomed to our conscious mind and where we can shine the spotlight of that attention. But there are other parts of the mind at play. So can you break that apart for us a bit?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So your mind's got three different levels. As you said, the conscious mind is what we're all used to. That's what we talk a lot about, the whole concept of consciousness. It's a word that's used as almost like an umbrella term
Mhm.
for our ability to be humans and respond to life. So it's very accurate, but there's a lot more underneath it. So simple definition, conscious mind is when you're awake. And it's only awake when you're awake. You've also got another level, two other levels. The one is, I'm going to start with the deepest level, which is the non conscious, NON, not unconscious. Unconscious is a brain state. So when you're asleep or when you're under anesthesia or something like that, then you're in a state of being unconscious.
Mhm.
So conscious is when you're awake, be conscious now. Your non conscious, NON, is operating 24/7. It drives the conscious mind. It's the biggest part of us. It's literally infinite. It is if it operates at 400 billion actions per second and faster. It's beyond space and time. It's where all your processing goes on. It's where all your every experience that you've ever had, which is made up of memories into thoughts, is stored basically. So everything, it absorbs 95% of, or up to basically 100% of what's going on around you all day long. It sifts through the experiences that we have because your conscious mind can't handle everything, but your non-conscious can. It's your wisdom. It's where everything that you need to survive is there. It's your intelligence. It's dynamic. It's fast. It's in action all the time. And that's what we need to tune into. And that when we talk about insight and deep thinking and wisdom, we're tapping into that level. It's your best friend because it's always searching to find, okay, this you've absorbed, that's not going to be good for you. And it eliminates a lot of what we are processing during the day. And then the things that we have already built in as patterns through conscious choice, and I'll explain how that works in a moment, it will make us aware of. How does it make us aware of them? Okay, so first of all, the non-conscious mind's really fast, 400 billion actions and fast per second and faster.
Hmm.
It's probably way faster. That's what we estimate as scientists. The conscious mind's quite slow. It's about 2,000 actions per second. In an easy way to understand, the conscious mind can handle around about one conversation at a time. Just think of it. If you're having one conversation, if there was another one going on, it would
Yes.
be really hard to split your time. So that's kind of what the conscious mind can deal with, one conversation at a time, and it's messy, and it should be
Yeah.
messy because
Barely one in my case.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So that can be like that too, and it's messy, and it's
Mhm.
because it's dealing with that whole concept of I don't feel like I can concentrate or focus all the time
Mhm.
is because we are dealing with unexpected and all this, these we learning. It's a very much a hands-on conscious mind is very much hands-on. Like a toddler. That's the easiest way to understand the conscious mind. And we know as a toddler, you can't just let a toddler do its own thing. You have to guide the toddler. And that's where the non-conscious mind comes in. We've literally got to train ourselves to listen to the wisdom of the non-conscious mind. And the way we do that is through signals. And the signals come from the non-conscious and are placed into the subconscious. Conscious, awake when you're awake, very
Mhm.
slow, one conversation at a time. Non-conscious, the deepest, biggest part of us that can handle an infinite number of conversations at the same time. Conversations meaning experiences, whatever,
Mhm.
life. And then in between, we have the subconscious, which is kind of like a waiting room. It can handle about 4 to 7 conversations at once.
Hmm.
So what's interesting is that you're at any one moment, your non-conscious, which is awake 24/7, will be searching, sorting out, processing, eliminating what's going to make us crash, finding the patterns that are disruptive, finding the things that are very good for us, and places them in order of priority into the subconscious. And so there's at any one moment, there's around about 4 to 7 thought patterns in our subconscious waiting to be dealt with. And those are the things it's kind of like a triage situation in a hospital, the things that are most disruptive from the highest to the lowest order of priority, and the things that are the most creative and good for you, also highest to lowest priority. There's always a balance. And then what happens is that once they hit the subconscious, and this is going on all day long, they then come into the conscious mind as signals. And those signals are our emotions. What do our emotions feel like in our body, our
Hmm.
behaviors, what we're saying and doing, how we're saying and doing it, and our perspectives, our attitudes. Now, right at the beginning of this conversation, you described beautifully what I talk about in my book and talk about all these thoughts and people pleasing and regret and all this stuff going through our mind. Now, all of that is coming from the non-conscious into the subconscious, into the conscious mind. So at any one moment, whatever is going on in your conscious mind are signals that are attached to a thought, and a thought is filled with memories, which are details. So that thought with its memories are experiences. And that's the non-conscious has decided, it knows what's best. We know what's best for ourselves in the depths of who we are. And so the signals draw our attention. So the signals, the unconscious puts it in the subconscious sends us signals. So whatever's the most disruptive. So maybe you may be in going from this interview into doing some work, and you find there's a thought, intrusive thought going through your mind, and you feel like you can feel the emotion. Maybe you're feeling a little anxious. That's emotion. Maybe you're feeling, you find yourself feeling a little bit withdrawn, or maybe a little irritable. I'm just making something up. Maybe the attitude is, gosh, this is happening again, or this is like something's worrying me. And maybe you're in your body, you're feeling like a bit of heart palpitation. So, what we can train ourselves to do is not ignore those four signals, because those four signals aren't coming from some random nothingness. They are attached to a thought, and a thought is filled with memories.
Mm.
Memories, a thought is made up of memories. So if something's coming up all the time, and I often say intrusive thoughts are your new best friend, we need to face them full on, because if a signal keeps coming up, those four signals keep coming up, it's it's our non-conscious mind via the subconscious triaging and saying, okay, this is something that's potentially disruptive to your life in this moment in time. You can't deal with everything all at once, but at this moment in time, you need to deal with this. So it's a good idea for us not to just push that down, which is what we often will do. We either
Hmm.
suppress, we get stuck in the emotions and start to ruminate. So we go round and round, and that creates chaos, or we deal with it. So there's kind of like one of three choices that we'll make. And so the relationship between the three parts of our mind can be managed. So mind management, if we learn to well, these are the signals. What's the most disruptive? I've got these various things, but this is popping up. I think it's attached to this thought. Okay, I do need to pay attention to this. And when I start making those kinds of decisions, then I start getting control of my next 63 seconds, and that becomes the next hour, and that becomes, the days and the months and so on. And so that's kind of how the minds work.
Mm.
So does that make
Yeah,
sense?
I think it's fascinating. So what's coming up for me in the last week, let's say, and particularly since I've been reading this book, so I have an impending trip. The itinerary is like quite intense. Okay,
Yeah.
so if I'm using um, this kind of metaphor of kind of the non-conscious mind sitting down here, sort of the roots of the tree system, if you will, and then coming into the subconscious mind as the trunk, and then coming kind of spreading out into the conscious mind as the branches, let's just say,
Yeah,
right?
we've got the tree imagery here to kind of demonstrate that.
And
Yeah.
you know, I'm having this kind of rumination around a lot of anxiety related to this impending trip. And it keeps recurring, and I
Mhm.
keep noticing the recurrence. Okay. And this is, I think, rooted in some habit or proclivity I have for people pleasing, because I am worried that I'm going to come up short. On this trip, there's a lot of
Mhm.
public performance and speaking and conferences, etc. And so, how would I best manage that level of sort of recurring anxiety?
Okay, that's really an excellent example. Okay, so the first thing is you've started paying attention to the recurring thoughts. So there's the intrusive thoughts that's coming up, and it's making you feel the level of anxiety. You've described it beautifully. So let's talk about the four signals that you're getting repeatedly. There's a level of anxiety. Your behaviors, are you feeling little how would you say you'd maybe withdrawing a little bit, or maybe talking about it, or maybe suppressing it, or is it making you feel moody or irritable, or
Yeah, it's certainly making me feel, it's certainly anxious, irritable, having some trouble sleeping, and then that's sort of compounding into this feeling of kind of chronic fatigue, I would call it.
okay, so then there's the anxiety, and then the behaviors are the not sleeping so well, and the chronic fatigue, and the slight the nervousness and whatever that. So that's your behaviors.
Hmm.
Feeling that in your body, you're probably tensing.
Hmm.
Just I can see your body actually tensed up as you
Yeah.
were talking about it. So
Yeah.
your body's tensing, your heart rate's probably increased, your heart rate variability's probably reduced. So that's between the ability of your heart to pump fast and slow. Okay,
Hmm.
and then also there's the perspective. Am I not going to be a success? Am I going to be able to will I be able to carry myself well enough? Will I be able to meet the expectation? You mentioned the word people pleasing a couple of times when we started the conversation. So
Hmm.
that's definitely at the core. So you've already started getting an idea of where this is coming from, that it's important for you to please people. You want to please people, but where is that coming from? A sense of lack of self-confidence, or it could be coming from a sense of basically sometimes when people pleases because you're in a situation where a person is maybe battling with mental health and you don't want to disrupt them anymore and you want to try and help them,
Yeah.
whatever. So somewhere there's been some sort of compromise
Hmm.
in you being you in order to please other people, in order to make, and so there's some core thing there. So in order to deal with that, there's the in the moment and then there's the long term. So the first thing is to ask yourself, like in dealing with this, you've got to deal with this in the moment. It's if you've got to still work and carry on life until you
Hmm.
get there, and then you've got to get there and carry. So what we need is help in a hurry in the moment, and that's actually why I wrote this book, because so many people have been asking me, and over the years as a therapist, people would want to know, what do I do right now? I'm actually in the state of panic, or I'm in that people pleasing moment, or I'm
Hmm.
in that whatever moment. How do I start now?
Hmm.
So in the very now moment, sometimes you don't have the cognitive power at that moment consciously you're still in the toddler kind of chaotic chaos of all the signals hitting you at once, that it's difficult to go and be logical about it and start finding, okay, well, this is linked to and doing the work of trying to deconstruct and reconstruct. So you want to just get to a place where you can calm down your neurophysiology, and that's where things like obviously the good old fashioned deep breathing. I mean, it really does work in that
Hmm.
moment. And the reason it works is because oxygen is information. And when we generally what we do is we breathe deeply in and deeply out, and that balances the variation between how the heart is pumping, basically. But when we get into a state of panic, we shallow breathe, and then that, you understand this from the work that you do, and that when we shallow breathe, we don't get oxygen to all the molecules, and oxygen carries information. Now, not only is it doing that physiology, it also affects the energy in the brain. And now that's because, now, why is the heart rate being affected? It's not coming from the heart out, it's coming from the mind in. So the anxious thought is generating an energy that actually affects your ability of your lungs to function properly. So it's the mind changes the lungs, the mind changes the heart rate variability, the mind is changing all of those things, changes the energy in the brain. So we've got to get our mind under control to restore that natural balance, if that makes sense.
100%. I mean, it is quite amazing how our anxiety and stress are so often just phantoms of our own projection in this way. I mean, I had an MRI a few days ago. They stick you into a
Yep,
kind of a
that tube.
very narrow tube.
It can be
It,
kind of
yeah, and I'm
scary.
quite claustrophobic. I had a traumatic experience as a child being locked in a
Oh,
locker, so
shame.
I've sort of carried that forward. And of course, I'm getting pushed into this tube, and I'm feeling a tremendous amount of anxiety and panic coming up. I'm having sort of a fight or flight sympathetic response. I
Yeah,
can feel that epinephrine kind of
yeah,
like coursing up
going
through my
through.
veins, and that's actually at its core sort of an adaptive response that serves our biological imperative on the Serengeti, but not necessarily when you're getting an
Exactly.
MRI. And of course, what do I do in that moment? Fortunately, I have a good amount of
Training.
arrows in my quiver. And it's just like, okay, Jeff, there's some application of my neo-mammalian brain here that, I know rationally I'm going to be fine. But
Yep.
really, somatically, I have to essentially put kind of top-down conscious pressure on top of that involuntary response, and the
Yes.
breath is available to me. It's pretty much the only thing available to
Yeah.
me at that moment, and that's what I did.
Yep.
And it was 12 minutes, and it wasn't the way I would normally choose to spend 12 minutes, but the breath got me through it really just fine. And this is, yeah, where it's so useful. But in reflecting upon it as I got out, I knew I would be fine, but the mind had essentially was tricking my body into thinking that there was some sort of existential threat.
Exactly. And so what had happened there was that if you think of the levels of mind, conscious, subconscious, and unconscious, if we if we can tap directly into the wisdom of the non-conscious, we'll be able to calm ourselves down and give ourselves and keep because then you're going to have the right wording, you're going to say the right things to oneself. The breath immediately that gets the physiology under control, but
Hmm.
then you've also got to have an element of, and sometimes that'll carry you through. Sometimes that's enough
Hmm.
because oxygen also carries, the molecules actually carry information. So as I'm breathing, if you've got resilience networks that you can draw on from previous experiences that you got through something, what will happen is that your mind will then, your unconscious mind will send up, you got through something really scary before. You actually
Hmm.
got through that. You may not consciously be aware of it, but non-consciously that network is activated, and that it's like a world wide web, and it's attached to the oxygen. So as you breathe, you don't
Mm.
breathe in fear, you breathe in that old network of, you actually got through it, but you're not consciously aware. So as soon as you breathe, you enable access to the non-conscious, and then the non-conscious can then start filtering through a mindset that's existing to then be attached to the molecule. So this is very powerful. What I'm saying is that actually a network, a memory,
Mm.
hops on the oxygen molecule and literally goes into the brain and into the body and then calms it down. So it's not just the air, the oxygen, it's what's attached to the oxygen. Because you can also have someone who's in a panic attack and you've trained yourself. I mean, this is your world. You've learned how to use breathing to your benefit, but sometimes people are in such a state of panic that what's happening is they're breathing in the wrong mindset. So here something
Mm.
pops up and they haven't, it isn't filtered properly through wisdom. So a network pops up that is, I am terrified, I'm not going to get through this, I'm going to die, this is, and they can't, all they can do is get stuck in that chaotic loop, and that literally shuts off the wisdom. The unconscious is saying, hey, hang on, there's good stuff here too, we can find something, even if it's not related to being in a tunnel. There's something here, you can remember a memory from childhood and a happy incident just the other day and a sunset, but all of that gets completely blocked because you then get stuck in the loop between the conscious mind that's now grabbed this toxic memory, and here's a toxic
Mhm.
looking tree that
Mhm.
becomes very that energy is now very strong because the spotlight's showing on that, it jumps on that oxygen and you stay in this loop, and the wrong energy goes into the brain, and that actually disrupts the functioning of the brain and the body because it's a whole network,
Mm.
and that then affects how one carries through into the next moment.
Mm.
So that's why it's so important to have in the moment techniques. So breathing, whatever, but you can, I always talk about, a lot of the techniques I talk about are um, proactive as well. There's things you can do right in the moment, like the breathing, like immediately drawing on any kind of happy memory. It doesn't have to necessarily be related to what you're going through in that moment, but training yourself to draw on that, because that actually then physically will come up and attach itself to the oxygen. So as you're breathing, you can breathe that in and then that starts helping.
Mm.
But you can be proactive. That's also what I try to teach in this book, is to build resilience networks
Yeah.
that and things like, funnily enough, for people pleasing is spending time to get to know yourself, which sounds almost counterproductive, but it's not, because when we've people pleased a lot, which we do a lot in our current day and age, it's very common because of our very productive driven society.
Yeah.
We forget to really get to know ourselves. So spending time, who is Jeff? What do I
Mhm.
really like? What are my values? And I know that always sounds so cheesy, but it is very important to spend that time to find out, what do I like? And you can find that through reading fiction. I know this almost sounds like we're making very big leaps here, but by reading fiction, other characters' lives, you start seeing reflections of your own, and it
Mhm.
makes you think and question. So what we found is an incredibly great way, that combination of, I'm going to spend time finding out who I am, I'm going to read fiction, even if I don't like reading fiction, I'm going to read some fiction and find something that grabs my attention, even if it's a biography. That's not fiction, I know, but it's someone's story, and then see how this relates to my life, and that helps you to find out more about yourself.
Mm.
When you strengthen that, then you can recognize and see, okay, I can just be me, and so whatever I generate is okay, and whether they like it or not doesn't matter anymore. I just know that I'm going to be authentic to myself, because, and that's the counter, that's the antidote to people pleasing. is we've pushed down our own value of self and almost forgotten who we are in the attempt to please others in a public arena or please a family member or something like that. And that then affects our confidence. And then it plays out in other areas that we get affected by all kinds of things that maybe didn't affect us before. So people pleasing has a very pervasive effect, very viral effect. That's a better word, a very viral effect, where we'll think, oh, I'm confident in that arena, but suddenly I've lost my confidence in
Yeah.
that arena and that kind of thing.
Yeah. I often, when I turn that spotlight of attention on myself, I generally land on, a fear of judgment,
Yes.
um, some degree of imposter syndrome often,
For sure.
and then really placing my own worth kind of in the hands of others, or seeing my worth through the eyes of
Yeah,
others.
which makes you very violated. You
Yeah.
think about it.
And I think it's interesting what you say about actually leaning into story and storytelling, because you can see your own story within the story of others.
Exactly.
And this is where I think narrative and storytelling can be very useful, because other people can see their stories in your own story.
Exactly.
And you feel less alone in that sense. And you also can actually shine a lot of compassion on yourself
Exactly.
when you know, God, I'm not the only one that feels this way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the ability
Yeah.
to say what you've just said came from you tapping into the depths of your non-conscious mind.
Mm.
And that because we at our core, we are made of love. We're wired for love. That's a Nobel Prize winning scientist has shown. It's a statement that Eric Kandel made, that we're wired for love. So we literally, every part of our being is to love ourselves and to love others.
Mm.
And judgment and self-criticism and people pleasing, these all go against the natural bounds of what a loving nature is, and self-compassion and that kind of thing. Because we're trying to always, and you never can please someone else. You can only be yourself, and then that just draws people. And that's what we've got to realize, that people are drawn to our authenticity as opposed to trying to please someone else.
Our desire to belong is often so deep that we will sacrifice authentic parts of ourselves for that belonging.
Yes.
So this is the tightrope act, is to really be comfortable with your authentic self, and belong instead of fit in, right?
Exactly.
And this is a great delineation that Brene Brown often makes. You also address in the book a point that just I highly resonated with, because I have a lot of friends and colleagues, and I will ask them, like, how you doing? How are you? And invariably I get almost always the same response: good, but I am so tired, right?
Yep.
This is so prevalent. And I wonder if you could kind of unpack why this is such a common response, or a common feeling that people are having. And is that endemic to our times, or is that just an overload of the conscious mind? Unpack this for us.
I think I'm so glad you asked that, because you're quite right. Every second person, or every person, it's just a very common response. And I catch myself, and then
Yeah.
and then you sort of I want to answer that, and then I wanted to also answer something from earlier question that kind of relates. But so let's first answer this. So rest and restore are two different things. And so what happens is that we will take a holiday, or take some time off on the weekend, or go and have a sauna, but we sit in that sauna and we spend the whole time worrying about what the conference is coming up. Or because I know you love soaring like I do. And so instead of restoring, you're just resting, because yes, you are sitting in the sauna. You can't exactly be in front of a group of people or on your computer, but your mind, which is driving your brain and your body and your physiology and your ability to benefit from that sauna, is chaotic, and it's not actually resting. Our brain and our body and our conscious mind do not have an endless store of energy. The subconscious has a more, but the non-conscious has unlimited energy. So we so often get stuck in the conscious brain loop as opposed to tapping into the non-conscious, and then we just don't ever really restore. So the only way to restore is to tap into the depths of the non-conscious. And so restoration is very different to rest. So having that sauna means sitting there and making a decision. Okay, I'm actually going to be in the sauna. I am going to work. I'm going to sit on my cell phone and cook my cell phone and answer some emails.
Hmm.
And that's my decision. And I'm not going to be torn between the two. Or I'm going
Mm.
to take this 15 or 20 minutes or 30 minutes, whatever it is. And I'm really just going to truly just meditate, take a thinker moment, switch off to the external, switch on to the internal, allow that free flow of thoughts, allow the daydreaming, make a note of the things that are popping up, be aware, not just a passive observer. You can shift from passive observation to being a bit more involved. You can move between the two, and actually then using that time to restore. Going on holiday, not going on holiday with your computer, or if you do, limiting the time, that kind of thing. So it's we people will think they're resting, but they're not, because they're still on the cell phone, they're still thinking about the next thing. We have to truly be able to, that lovely poem. I can't remember the poet, but what is this life if full of care? We cannot take time to just stand and stare, to stand beneath a bough and stare as long as sheep and cows. We really
Mm.
do need that time to switch off and it doesn't have to be long. What I teach people is a thinker moment. A thinker moment is one of the most powerful restoration tools. You don't have to go on holiday to have a thinker moment, although I recommend using them on holiday too. And it's simply taking around about 45 to 60 seconds every hour, and then at least 10 minutes during the course of a day, where you literally switch off to the external and switch on to the internal. So
Hmm.
you could be sitting at your computer working away, and then you just, for 30 seconds to 60 seconds, just either stare at your computer or stare out the window or close your eyes, but you just allow that free flow.
Yeah.
And that helps to just recharge the brain and restore.
Yeah. It's so interesting. I also think that there are great moments of satori or awakening in these liminal moments,
Yes.
somewhere kind of between consciousness and unconsciousness. Often it's ascribed to this kind of theta state. I
Yeah.
know that it's, Einstein and Edison often claim that they had their great revelations kind of in that state.
Yeah.
But I think we know it by dint of our own experience. We'll go out, for a walk in nature, and the aperture of attention gets, really, really wide. And then we'll have a very, very creative thought within that moment of true restoration. And so often it's actually when we shut down to the external world and we become
Mm.
more sensitive or interoceptive, or however you want to describe it, that sometimes these gems emerge from under the crust of that consciousness.
Absolutely, and it's switching into so you're still thinking, but you're switching into a different mode of thinking, where
Hmm.
you are cutting out that all the buzz, and we can do it. We can do that. We can make that shift. And when we make that shift, you can train yourself to do that in a 63-second moment. That 63 seconds is a very proactive time unit we've seen from research, that you can, like for example, the breathing. If you breathe do 10 seconds, sort of in for 3, out for 7, 6 times at 6 times 10 in 60 seconds, that changes things. If you then do an activity, like a mental activity, like a mind activity, like I'm going to think of I'm going to become aware of my feeling, but I'm going to think of a beautiful thought. If you the 60-second mark, you can proactively start training yourself to get into the depths of your unconscious. So
Hmm.
when we say switch off to the external and switch on to the internal, we really are trying to switch onto the non-conscious,
Hmm.
because you're still aware. You're looking at nature. Maybe
Hmm.
your eyes are, maybe you're walking through nature, or you are looking at a sunset, or you're just sitting and remembering or watching your grandkids play, or kids play, or listening to a fun conversation between your adult daughters, whatever it may be. It's enjoying those moments in those 60-second units. If people can realize, if I can grab that 60 seconds, I can actually then prevent a toxic thought from wiring in. So, for example, when you are in that anxious thought comes up, like you spoke about earlier on, it's that's a reality for you. This is something, you're not just going to make it go away.
Hmm.
But if you can direct the neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is how the mind changes the brain and the body, the mind brain body network. We can direct that, and you can direct that in that moment. So either that anxious thought can get out of control, and then you wire that in even stronger, and it becomes a pattern over time and a habit over time.
Hmm.
Or you can say, yeah, I do feel like this. I am anxious, and this is okay. I'm going to channel that anxiety into really researching whatever topic I'm going to speak, whatever you, so you shift that in. So you don't ignore and you don't suppress, but you change the nature and the quality of the network that is going to build anyway.
Hmm.
So whatever you're thinking about comes from inside out, but it's stimulated by outside in. So the outside experiences all come into the mind. The mind is generating from inside and it's coming in from outside. Those details cluster to form like little clouds, thought clouds. So if you think of an, a field around me and little clouds around me, lots of little clouds.
Hmm.
That's all of my experiences coming in. My mind then takes those and makes copies of those and puts those into the brain and the body, literal copies, and then creates like our own world wide web. Now we can direct that. So let's say we've gone down the anxiety path and we've got really worked up, or we've got to that point where that person's working you up so much in a meeting and you just want to punch them in the face, or whatever it may be, or you've something from the past has just jumped into the present and it's affected you because you were triggered by something. That if we can picture in our mind, okay, this is now something that's come up, a thought cloud that's come up, that's toxic, that I never dealt with. It's information coming in. The two have come together. That cloud is now activated a network and added to it in the brain and the body. So I've got this cloud and copies inside the brain and the body. So there's an actual network forming, physical, made of proteins and chemicals and electromagnetic. This is all very real.
Yeah.
But I can direct that. I can actually say, okay, this is going in this direction. I can change the way that the from a stormy cloud into something that's, I can control the storm, I can redirect the energy, I can change the way the proteins fold just by managing my mind.
Hmm.
And
Isn't that amazing?
it is amazing. And there's
Yeah.
an actual formula that we can train ourselves to use. And then there's techniques. So this book gives you the techniques in the 63 seconds. And then there's an actual formula that you can use long term, which comes to your other question that you asked earlier on about how would you control this in the long term, because you mentioned a pattern.
Right.
If we have patterns in our life, that means it's a habit. That means that we've spent longer than 63 days building, practicing, literally,
Hmm.
whether it's good or bad. Okay, good, the good, bad, the bad, and the ugly. So if we're going to, so that means that we've taken a cloud, made a copy, built it into the brain, built it into the body, and we've created this worldwide web inside of ourselves, and we've made it so strong that it's happening without us even really, without us consciously thinking. So it's popping into the conscious mind from the non-conscious, and we're ignoring the wisdom of the non-conscious. It's so it's like this. The non-conscious is saying, hey, ignore this one, but we've chosen with our conscious mind to focus on that one. And then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and stronger, and that's, it shows up in our life and drives us. So anything that's a pattern like that, whatever it may be, whether it's people pleasing, whether it's responding to something that happens in your past and it's affected a relationship, whether you're triggered by, maybe get angry quickly, or you get self-criticism, whatever's a pattern, it's not going to go away in 63 seconds.
Hmm.
You can recognize it in the 63 seconds and you can proactively start taking measures to calm yourself down. Then you have to do the work. And the work is to go beyond the 63 seconds into 63 days at least. So what part of my research has been to look at how do we change these patterns that keep popping up every time I go to a conference or every time I have to do whatever, and the people pleasing or whatever it may be. And that's where what I researched for years is, how long does it take? We often hear 21 days to change a habit. That's not true. That
It's
came from,
apocryphal.
yeah, it basically, stuff happens in the 21 days because
Yeah.
stuff happens in the moment. But in the 21 days, what we'll do is we'll basically just identify a pattern and start the process of deconstructing and reconstructing. But if we don't direct that process, we can actually make it worse. So what the research shows is that we need to, when we see there's a pattern of people pleasing, we then need to say, okay, it's coming up now because you've got this conference. But what I need to do is actually allocate 5 to 15 minutes. I would recommend 15 minutes a day in the first 21 days, and then about 5 minutes a day for the balance of 42 days. Work in a 63-day cycle, which is about 9 weeks. And you just basically work through a formula, and we can discuss what that formula is. And that formula is, how do I now find this network and weaken it, because you can rewire. Your brain and your body are plastic, and your conscious mind is plastic. So you can take whatever and you can reorganize it. Doesn't mean you're going to forget the past. You're going to be able to talk about the stories that have happened in your life, but they no longer influence how they play out into your future. You can change that influence. So they become, I was like this, now I'm like this. And that's what
Mm-hmm.
one can do. But what I found is that to get that process going, we need an in the moment thing,
Mm-hmm.
which is all these different techniques that I speak about in Help in a Hurry. How do we get the moment under control so that I can then do the work? Another thing related to this is there's a lot of emphasis on, and I'm so glad there is, on meditation, on breathing, on being aware of our feelings, on being present in the now moment. But what the research also shows is if you only do that, you're going to get worse. Because what happens is it's like a temporary relief. But if you don't deal with the core issue,
Mm.
because it works so well, and all this physiology happens in the mind brain body connection, the psychoneurobiology, that you feel so amazing. But if you don't do something more, it'll keep coming back and the pattern won't be changed. It's
Mm.
kind of like when you fly a plane. If you, or not that you're flying a plane, but I mean, if you think of a
The
plane,
podcast feels like a plane
it does feel
sometimes.
like a plane, doesn't it? It
Yeah.
does. But if you think of flying a plane, you've got to prepare the plane,
Yeah.
and then the pilot takes off, it flies and lands. What we're doing a lot of today in today's current society is we're preparing the plane, breathing, meditation,
Mm.
exercise, stress management. We've taking off, which is, I feel like this is what's going on in my life. But then we don't actually do the work of deconstructing, reconstructing, and landing. We don't progress forward. So people are getting stuck in that loop and getting worse,
Yeah.
and that affects mental health.
Yeah. So we have these salves that are ephemeral, but then the work, is that what the neurocycle really addresses, for example?
Yes, so the
Yeah.
Neurocycle enables you to use the plane analogy to actually say, okay, this is, I need to calm down the neurophysiology. A lot of these techniques in here are great for that first stage to get yourself into that preparation, because we can be so neurophysiologically activated that it's really hard to do much more. So that's the preparation, that's the meditation, the breathing, and there's a million different exercises one can do in those moments. Then the neurocycle then takes it beyond. So the taking off is being able to be aware of those signals. So I spoke about those signals earlier on, and you discussed that you feel anxious, that you're not sleeping so well, that there's this in your body, there's a tension in your body, and the attitude is that I'm in another situation again of, am I going to be good enough? Are they going to judge me? I hate being in this, whatever, that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So the neurocycle, the first thing is to be aware of those four signals, and I call that gather awareness. And what we've shown is that we get massive changes in all the hormones, in our telomeres, we see biomarkers changing in the body. In the we use QEG to look what's happening in the brain. We get that balance of the theta, alpha, beta, gamma. We see massive changes when we start preparing, and then we gather awareness. So preparing is all that meditation stuff. The first step, taking off the plane, taking off, is gather awareness of your four signals, which is the emotions, the behaviors, the body sensations, and the perspectives. But in a very almost objective way. It's like I literally say to people, 4 sentences: I am feeling, I feel this in my body, this is affecting my behaviors in this way, and there's no judgment. It's all self-compassion. It is you standing back and observing and gathering awareness. That neuroscientifically starts to bring that thoughts, that's the original, that originating underlying source that's putting you into this pattern that keeps repeating itself. It starts shining a light on it and bringing it into the conscious awareness. We know from neuroscience that when you do that, when you do the 63-second preparation, and when you do, which is this book, and when you do that gather awareness, you weaken all the neural networks. They become weakened. Now, anything that's weakened can be changed. So what we do is we unlock neuroplasticity, and we can now redesign. We can become the designer. The second stage is, now that I've gathered awareness, and you just spend a minute or so on that. You don't spend hours. This is done daily over 63 days. You can't change a pattern in one day. You can get control in 63 seconds, but you can't change a pattern in 63 seconds. And so then you're going to reflect. And the reflection is like shining a white light through a prism. if you shine a white light through a prism, it comes out as a rainbow. There's depth. So in every gathering of, if as I gather my signals, it's going to lead me to a thought. Over time, that thought, as I reflect, I'm going to get insight. I'm going to start seeing all the depth of the thought, all the details in this thought. It's not going to happen on day one, but as I reflect, I start the process. So reflection is, why do I feel this way? Why am I feeling this? It's the who, the what, the when, the where, the why, the how. This is all very organized because we respond very well to order, our mind, brain, body network. Then you go into a third stage. And all of these stages I'm talking about, which create the Neurocycle formula, which is the directed neuroplasticity formula, has been based on very rigorous scientific research on how thoughts form in the mind brain body network and what thoughts are and what are memories and how you can deconstruct them and reconstruct them and all that fancy science and what's happening in the brain and all that stuff. So the third step is then, as you've now shone the light, there's a lot of details in all of our stories. So each experience is a story, and there's a story behind the people pleasing you were mentioning. There's something that tracks back to maybe you were locked in a locker as a child, and there's maybe other things around it. So as you go into the third stage of the formula, you're going to mindstorm and you write. Like when we sweat or something like that, we're getting it out. We need to get things out. When you cry, for example, and you cry, for example, grief tears. When
Yeah.
you grief, you're getting the hormones out
Yeah.
and you're balancing and that kind of thing.
ACTH, I think.
There we go, and you start
Literally chemically in the tears.
exactly, you restore balance. If you keep them in, if you choke the tears, you actually disrupt the balance of hormones and biochemicals and things. So this getting things out, mindstorming, writing.
Exorcism.
It is literally,
Yeah.
it literally is get it out, get it on paper as far as possible. And then the fourth stage, I love that exorcism. Then the fourth stage of the neurocycle is once it's all out, but you first got to awaken it. You first got to calm down the neurophysiology. You got to gather awareness of those signals, which takes you to the thought, which creates this whole neurophysiological change. The mindstorm then starts bringing stuff from the non-conscious that is related and starts giving you also wisdom. It doesn't come up just a bunch of bad stuff. It'll come up with wisdom as well. You're not going to hit that on the first day. It's going to come over time. Then the fourth step is you've got all the stuff, all this data. Now we start reconceptualizing, reframing. This is what's happened. What can I do? This is what I'm seeing. What can I do? And then the fifth step is, okay, this is enough work for today. What action can I do today to get me through today? And that's the basic formula that you apply daily over time to rewire a network. If there's a massive abuse, like something like a trauma from childhood, sexual abuse or something, obviously one cycle is not going to disrupt it. But this is a healing journey.
Yeah.
And it begins with us, getting help in a hurry, and then from there working through a process. And then that's mind management. And this is a life skill. It's not something, once you learn it, it's very natural. Everything that I'm telling you, you know already. All I'm doing is putting it into a formula that one can use.
Well, we need systems.
We need systems.
Yeah, and we need guidance. And I think this is what you're doing. You're able to provide guidance in the moment, and that's what you're doing with this book. But then, your life's work has been dedicated to actually really helping people with neuroplasticity, essentially rewiring the circuitry of their brain such that they can heal and live more vital and energetic lives. I want to talk a little bit about happiness because you talk about it in the book, and this is a topic that I've ruminated over in a good way, where I think for so many of us, happiness exists as this shiny object sort of glittering on the horizon, and that, if only we make this choice, or only if we make this choice, well, then we'll be able to sort of eliminate the chasm between where we are and this happiness.
This elusive happiness.
Yeah. And then maybe we get that thing and, we cut the ribbon off that box, and then there's another glittery object, farther around the horizon. And, we become kind of trapped on this hedonic treadmill, always trying to, find these pleasant sensations that lead to this kind of ineffable or sort of inscrutable idea of happiness. And then we get really upset that we're not happy all the time, right?
Exactly.
And I think you untangle this really well in the book, that, maybe we're not actually meant to be happy all the time, or that the happiness is not necessarily a state that is really applicable to every single moment of life. Actually, I'll let you explain it. Help us understand how we should be thinking about happiness and what's the healthiest way to kind of pursue this concept?
Great question, and I love the way you laid that out. It was really well done. We with the positive psychology movement, it's kind of confused people,
Hmm.
that and the mental health distorted kind of messaging. So we've got two messages coming at us, and one is that you're supposed to be happy all the time. Just think
Hmm.
positively. It does all this great stuff in your brain and your body. It
Yeah.
does. Happiness and positive thoughts do things in your great things in your brain. But then comes the delusion that, oh, wow, well, if I have a negative thought, then I must quickly swap it for a positive thought, or I must just slap on a positive affirmation, or I mustn't allow myself to think those negative thoughts because it's doing this to my brain and my body. So it was insufficient information that people have been given. Then the whole mental health side saying, oh, okay, you've got all these emotions that they're not happy emotions. You're feeling sad, you're feeling bad. There's something wrong with you.
Right.
This is very
Right.
confusing for people.
Yeah.
Then we have the productivity zeitgeist where I've got to just be so productive and I've got to have these goals and I've got to achieve these goals. And yes, if I will. So the confusion that has been thrown into the mix is very overwhelming for people. Meanwhile, if we just step back from all that confusion, there's good in everything, obviously. Every movement, every philosophy, every new psychological concept always brings some good knowledge. But we need to know how to disseminate that knowledge and discern what is good from each of those elements. And so the one thing is, if I am, let's take the positive psychology movement. Yes, being happy, having positive thoughts does incredibly good stuff for your neural networks and your whole psychoneurobiology, mind and body connection. But it also does a lot of good when we embrace the sadness and the depression and the
Mm.
anxiety, and because that's all part of being human. You can't just take one without the other. It's an imbalanced scale. You can't appreciate the joy if you don't understand the sadness. And the sadness is giving you information that increases your depth and your growth. So the message of, if you sad from the mental health side and just swap it for something good from the positive psychology side, and it's very broad generalizations, but it's a general idea, creates a confusion in us that we've got to be seeking after happiness all the time as this ultimate goal, like you so beautifully described. And
Mm.
that, because it's not true to our human nature,
Mm.
every emotion we have is good. Even the anger, even the unforgiveness, even the frustration, even the jealousy. Why is it good? Because it's giving us information. If I say, oh, I'm feeling jealous, why am I feeling jealous? As opposed to, oh, that's bad. That's not a positive that's not a positive emotion. That's something wrong with my mental health. If I must just swap it with a good one. That's very disruptive because I create a complete imbalance. And we see this in the research we've done. We've seen people that when people think in this way, when they close their eyes and we do a QEEG on them, the chaos in the energy that we see in the brain is, and the body and the hormones, even down to telomeres changing, is crazy. Whereas within a 9-week cycle, you can teach a person to manage their mind, and they get to the point where they close their eyes, and you can see the whole change of energy in the brain, and the whole change in literally in the DHEA and the telomeres and different biomarkers that you can look at. And so these within short periods of time. So you want to be able to close your eyes and relax. And so happiness is being able to understand that it's okay to not be okay. It's
Mm.
okay to just I feel sad today.
Mhm.
I feel jealous today. What is, but not just stay there, to also go through that. Why do I feel this way? What am I going to do about this? Not, oh, I feel sad and
Just wallow
get
in
into wallow in it. Yes, thank you. I
it.
couldn't get the word out. Wallow in it. You want to acknowledge it, and then you want to progress. You want to fly the plane and land the plane.
Yeah.
I feel like this. Why am I feeling like this? And move through the steps of the neurocycle. Um, so it's okay to not be okay. And that's really important. And what research has shown, Jeff, which is so interesting, is that this pursuit of happiness that is such a current thing it creates more depression. It increases depression
Yeah, and I'm not
and
sure it's
anxiety.
something that you can pursue because you can't really be happy in the future.
No,
The present
exactly.
moment is the only opportunity for happiness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like looking at a camera. Take your photos out on your phone, and you can look at the past, and that's prior to the moment now, and you can then be in the now and take a photo of the now, and then so
Mhm.
but this is where you're at now.
Mhm.
You're not there yet. You haven't taken that photograph tomorrow yet.
Yeah.
We've got to learn from the past but we've got to live in the now.
Yeah, and there's also, I suppose, kind of a um, what do they call it? The unity of opposites. I mean, how would we even know what happiness is if we hadn't experienced some degree of
Exactly.
sadness? It's
Exactly.
that they actually define each other.
They
So if
do.
you're happy all the time, is it still even happiness? I'm not sure you can actually
No.
call it that. You know, you also talk about regret in the book, and I think this is an area that is very resonant for a lot of
Mm,
people because I think many of us can become anchored in this idea that if I had done something else in the past, um, then I would have changed the outcome of that thing, and that we can get very kind of moored
mm,
to that, and by extension, then relive that regret kind of over and over again, and even sometimes project it into the future
exactly.
as a as an anticipated negative memory that we're making. Um, how would you advise people to approach the feeling of regret?
So important. I think this is something that, not I think, I know from the research that this is something that I think it's in the high 90s percentage of people around the world battle with. So essentially, there's every if we can adopt the understanding that regret can be something that can be learned from. So everything that we've done is going to teach us something. But if we just going to pursue, let me explain it like this: you get upward and downward counterfactuals. So what that means, it's a fancy term for there's facts, and there's a fact that can take us look at something in the positive, and a fact that
Hmm.
can look at something in the negative. So we can say to ourselves, okay, I didn't do that, or I did do that. If I
Hmm.
had done it that way, or if I had done
Mm.
that,
Yeah.
then wonderful things would have happened. And so you play out these scenarios
Right.
that never
Yeah.
occurred, and potentially will never occur because because the past is done, and that situation will never reoccur in exactly the same way. That's an upward counterfactual, and that creates a cycle of regret that people get stuck in
Mm.
because it's so destructive, and makes you just feel depressed and anxious because I can't get there, but that is what I think I would have been. And that's where people get stuck. You get a downward counterfactual, which actually works better because you say, well, if I did do that, it's more realistic. That positive thing could have happened, but actually, there's a good chance those negative things would have happened. But by the same token, you don't really know if they would have happened or not, because also, once again, it never
You're
happened.
never going to live in that
So
painting.
exactly. So we want to have almost like a balance. So we want to allow ourselves when we find ourselves in that cycle of regret. And I talk with experience because this is an if only, could have, would have, should have,
Hmm.
wish I had have done all those things. Can I know that I've battled tremendously with that
Hmm.
if only
Yeah.
scenario that is destructive. It's so destructive. If one can say, okay, this is always think of the neurocycle formula. Acknowledge it. Don't deny it. Don't suppress it. Maybe calm yourself down a little bit, do that breathing or do one of those exercises that I talk about in the book, whatever, and get yourself into a state of neurophysiological calm, which can take you 10 seconds, honestly. Then say, okay, I am regretting this. This is the situation. Label it. Speak it out loud. Say, I'm. This is it. This is the thought that I've got in my head at the moment. This is how it's making me feel. These are the words I would attach to it. This is where I'm feeling this in my body. This is how it's affecting my behaviors and how it's going to affect my behavior the rest of the day. I think this is my perspective in this moment. And then why? Why am I feeling like this? And then you'll find the counterfactuals will come up. I'm feeling like this because if I had done that, this would have happened.
Hmm.
Really? If I had done it, that would have happened. Really?
Hmm.
And so now we're going to, well, let's third step of the neurocycle formula or the directed neuroplasticity formula. Let's mindstorm this.
Yeah.
Let's see. Did that really happen? Could they, and have a whole discussion. Then you get to the fourth step, realism. Realism is okay, well, it didn't actually happen. That is nice if it did happen, but the reality is this happened now. So we've got two forks we can go down in the road. There's always something that we can learn from what we did or didn't do, and that did or didn't work out. So what did I learn that didn't work? Thomas
Hmm.
Edison's a great example. After his, I think, 1,001 times of trying to get the light bulb to work,
Hmm.
when the reporter said, well, how do you feel about your 1,000 plus failures? He turned around quite horrified and said, I learned 1,000 things of what not to do. That is stuck in my head for years. And that's kind of how is a good way of an active reach, a first step of, okay, what didn't what didn't work? And that's okay, what didn't work. So what can I learn? What's the silver lining? There's always, you may not feel it now, but as you work through this process, it may take you 63 days to get through that regret if it's a big thing that you're regretting. But eventually you will see the silver lining.
Hmm.
Also, I think of the quote by Christopher Reeves when he first, he got paralyzed. Christopher Reeves, Superman, got paralyzed from that one move. He was asked at one of his first public out, talks or engagements after the incident. The reporter said, "If you go back to that day, what would you change? Would you change anything?" And he said, "No, I don't." He interrupted them. He was actually said he stopped them asking the question. He said, "No, I don't go back to that day to think what could I change, because if I stayed there, I would get so stuck and so depressed I wouldn't be able to move forward." And that's the thing with regret; it keeps you in the conscious disrupted energy, disrupts the energy in your brain. It's distorted energy. It distorts, you create toxic fields in your brain, that toxic fields in your body. And when you get stuck in that cycle, that's when addiction and all the big stuff can start happening, because it's so destructive. Regret is really one of the biggest things that leads to shame. It leads to so many other, it's really a big core issue in triggering a lot of the other mental health things that we see happening. We can't ignore it. Christopher Reeves wasn't saying I ignore that. And it definitely crossed his mind of what could have been done differently, but he didn't allow himself to stay there. So it's a matter of acknowledge, don't deny, don't suppress, because it's like a closet that you fill with stuff and you never tidy, it eventually falls open and everything falls out. We have to
Hmm.
deal with it, but
Hmm.
we can't get stuck there. I
Hmm.
mean, that's a long answer. Did that answer your question?
No, that's beautifully, beautifully put. Um, I suppose there is an element of forgiveness and self-forgiveness associated with regret
Mm,
sometimes. Um, that sometimes that one can regret one's own sort of maladaptive behavior,
mm,
uh, and wish they could go back to that moment and have done something else. um,
exactly.
and then, but you can't. And so the options available to you are to live within this kind of maelstrom of regret, which does not seem to be a very happy
No,
place to
it'll
be.
just destroy happiness and peace
Um,
and that sense of peace, which is our fuel.
yeah. Or, be able to metabolize in some fashion that feeling of regret, but also engage in some degree of forgiveness and self-forgiveness. Um,
Definitely.
and I know that that is another aspect, I think, of cleaning up your mental mess, if you will.
Yeah.
Certainly, I think we understand intuitively that forgiveness is not just a gift that we give someone else. We
Mm-mm.
give it to ourselves, right? It's an
Absolutely.
it's a gift that allows us to sort of detoxify, to let go of that ember of resentment or anger, and drop it and stop getting burned ourselves. But I wonder kind of how you see the broader act, or I'm not even sure I would call it an act, but how would you see forgiveness kind of within the greater project of becoming kind of more mentally well?
Oh, I love that question, and it's so important. I'm going to draw on quantum physics to explain the basic principles. And there's a principle called entanglement. And
Hmm.
entanglement occurs within ourselves as well as between
Hmm.
others. Okay, so
Yeah.
basically, when one particle moves in this, it's going to move in the same way.
Yeah.
So there's a connection, as Einstein called it, spooky action at a distance. But we know that it's, now as science has advanced, we see that is the principle. Now, bring that down, energy at our core. Yes, you can see me, I can see you, there's physical things, but we know that there's atoms, molecules, and we know there's the subatomic level, there's energetic vibrations and all that kind of thing. And there is a constant dynamic organic growth that's happening in us as humans. So when I talk about networks forming, there's entanglements forming. So there's these particles move. They're sometimes a particle, they're sometimes a wave, and that's at our most basic level. So when it comes to forgiveness, every thought that we have in response to an experience, and a thought is an experience, but as we add information to that, as we respond to an experience, that's detail. There's lots of details in a response. There's lots of details that then form that thought. So thoughts are made of memories. there's a thought. You can see there's lots of branches. If I hold up this one, that would be a healthy thought. There's lots of branches. Those branches represent all the details. So if this is toxic, this is healthy. If I recall something that I did that I don't like and that I can't forgive myself, it looks like I've wired it in like that in a toxic way. It's created very toxic energy flow. It's disrupted neurochemistry and telomeres and thought patterns. It's created mindsets that are disruptive. It's viral. And if I don't deal with that, it's entangled in my life. It's not just alone. Nothing works in isolation about you as a human. Mind, brain, body network. All networks influence each other. You can't just pull out one plug and hope it's on, or put something in and hope it's only limited to that. So forgiveness relates to the principle of, if I don't forgive myself for that, that incident is going to affect, it's entangled with me as a human and other incidents. It'll affect the things that are closest to it in nature. So maybe it's a business decision. So maybe that regret then affects business decisions. But down the line, that regret will have a viral influence maybe on decisions in your relationship and so on. So forgiveness disentangles. It breaks that entanglement. It takes the power that that toxic thought has out of its ability to affect other areas of our life. So forgiveness is a very good place to start. And then you've got to deconstruct that. You can't keep it strong. It's got to be deconstructed so that it shrinks and becomes a very weak combination of like a weak, like if you think of a tree, that big ugly tree, this part needs to shrink and eventually it needs to be, you can't pull it out. Nothing can just be pulled out and thrown away. You can't just replace a positive with a negative or an affirmation. We've got to work through the process of, why am I so caught up in that regret? What is it? And very often we know why. We know why, we know the source, but we haven't come to terms with accepting it. So that takes time. It's a process of healing and it's a journey. And so the forgiveness is all the way through. I didn't do that. Okay, I forgive myself. I didn't do that. Each forgiveness creates less entanglement and takes the power. Eventually that thing shrinks. It's this small. And then you can say, once I was believing this about myself and made me feel so guilty and I failed, and if I did this, and I realize now that that's unrealistic. But to get to the point of being able to say that, I have done a lot of work. And that's what people don't realize with forgiveness. It does require a consistent practice. And it's going to take at least 63 days. Let me tell you, if not longer, per issue.
Yeah. And I often find that it will have its origin cognitively,
Yes, in the mind.
but migrate to the heart maybe over 63 days
Well,
to actually
immediately.
feel
Yes.
a degree of true, honest forgiveness and not just know it seems to be
So
a
true,
journey.
Jeff. So what you've just said there, when we talk about the head and the heart, what we're essentially talking about is the physical network in the brain and the heart physically and throughout the body of that, and the mind. So the clouds in the mind, and then it's connected to the network in the brain that looks like that, and then in the body it looks like this, little bushes. That, when we talk about connecting to our heart, what we're doing is we're actually connecting to the non-conscious. So we're either operating in this very almost visceral, just conscious mind network thing, but as soon as we bring in the non-conscious, as soon as we tap into the depths of our wisdom, it changes the nature of what that looks like, and it goes from being a big ugly network into this beautiful network with just a part that is now sealed in a box attached to it, like if you think of a little part of a tree that's sealed off, and that's just your past, but it no longer affects you. And that's that head heart that we use, the terminology of head and heart is quite literally, I'm sorry, the scientist always comes out of me, but it's quite literally a restructuring of your World Wide Web within you. And that requires the forgiveness and all those kinds of things. And it requires you to get into the depths of the unconscious. That takes work. And with our very fast social media, technology-based world, quick fix mentality, we need to stand beneath the boughs and steer as long as sheep and cows to get down to the depths of our unconscious.
Let's hover over social media for a moment, because you brought it up and we touched on it before we started rolling cameras, because, we seem to be more fluent with kind of different forms of mental illness. We're certainly talking about it more. It's less stigmatized, and in many senses, that's a very, very good thing. At the same time, there is this kind of TikTokification, if you will, of kind of of mental illness, um, in all of its forms. And I wonder kind of how you see the healthy balance here between kind of pulling back uh, the veil or the curtain in order to more openly talk about issues relating to depression and mental illness, but then on the other side, potentially um, uh, cheapening it slightly, or sometimes self-diagnosing it in a way that is not necessarily grounded in good science. So, how do we balance kind of those two things? Essentially, being able to talk more honestly about it, but maybe not talk too much about it on TikTok.
It's, it's just such a relevant question and such a big answer. But the short sort of top end of the answer is that um, the increase. The yes, we're talking about it more. Yes, we thought we had reduced the stigma, but research shows otherwise, that it's actually increased the stigma.
Mm.
It's led to an oversimplification of a very complex thing called human life. So
Mhm.
if someone has an
Mhm.
adverse experience, they're going to have a response to that adverse experience, and that response would be normal in that experience. If you've lost a child, you're going to be in grief and you're going to be depressed and really sad, and that's not a mental illness. If
Mm.
you have gone to war, if you have had repeated business failures, if you have isolated at school, life, all the incidences of life, from the little stuff to the big stuff, on a scale of 1 to 10, 8, 9, and 10 would be trauma. Trauma happens to us. Everything in between are habits that we have formed. We've done them. Trauma
Mhm.
happens to us. We do the other stuff. Okay, and then you've got one, two, and three on the scale, which are just the day-to-day things that can become a habit, or translate into a habit. So in terms of social media, what we've done is kind of just eliminated that whole scale and jumped straight to a concept that's not even scientific,
Mhm.
but it's given the reason people latched onto the labeling and the term mental illness is because we've taken something that's so complex and so hard. It's so hard to deal with our unique emotions and our responses in life. Life is hard. So we want
Mhm.
nice little neat packaged categories. And that's what the 40-year model, 50-year model of mental health has offered. It said, oh, okay, like diabetes, like cardiovascular disease, there's a biological cause, there's a specific way of testing, and there's a specific treatment.
Mhm.
So if you have these symptoms, you've got cardiovascular disease. If you have these symptoms, you've got diabetes. They've taken that model and applied it onto mental health, but you can't. Because if you and I both have a similar experience, both of us maybe a people-pleasing experience because both of us speak in public audiences, your story is going to be radically different to mine. Your
Mhm.
anxiety and my anxiety around this doesn't mean we have a mental illness. It means we're having a very normal reaction to an adverse circumstance, and we've got to now
Mhm.
work out why and work through it and all the rest of it. That's on a simple level. Let's say someone is raped. They will go through depression and anxiety. Those are signals. They're not diseases. Depression and anxiety is an emotional warning signal. It's going to be linked to behavioral warning signals, perspective warning signals, bodily sensation warning signals that I spoke about earlier on. So what we've got to do is be careful of taking a label and thinking, oh, these symptoms, I've now got autism, which is like the latest, or I've got ADHD. I mean, you can't do that because
Mhm.
they don't exist as entities. They
Yeah.
are behaviors. ADHD is a set of behaviors that are
Yeah.
signals, that are one of a group of signals in response to certain things. Yes, there's a genuine 2 to 17% of people that potentially have problems with learning and so on. But the TikTokification, where there's this desire to, oh, how do I understand myself? How do I make meaning? Boom. If I have these symptoms, I've got anxiety, I've got a mental health illness.
Yeah.
And that's been the danger. So it takes something big and puts it into a little box and takes away the depth of it, and is
Mhm.
dangerous because it reduces people's resilience. And this is what we're seeing is you think, well, every time I feel sad, that's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
It's not something wrong with you.
Yeah.
It's distorted the whole thing. So it's a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. That's such a good point. And I think it's a good place to summarize, because we've talked a lot about kind of different feelings and emotions that arise within consciousness. So that could be regret, that could be fear, that could be this kind of notion that I want to people please. This could be, our inability to forgive or whatever, or sadness, like you said. And you end the book kind of giving us a certain kind of permission, that it's okay to not be okay. And I think that that's a really important message, for people, because I think people can take that message and apply a lot of self-compassion there, as those feelings and emotions kind of inevitably arise in a very complicated and messy world. And so I wonder if you could kind of codify
Summarize it.
that message for people.
Absolutely. And it's essentially, to be human, we have to embrace everything, and we have to process and reconceptualize. So this whole thing of I've got to be something happy and all these, it's not real. It's actually, it's okay. In fact, research shows that most of our day, 95% of your day, you go around, you're not feeling any major happiness, whatever, you're just going about your day. This whole thing that we're supposed to be like all the time, that's not really what humans are. The biggest thing that we should be striving after is it's okay not to be okay, and having peace with that. Peace is the fuel that is something that in the midst of chaos, I can be crying, I can be sad, I can be grieving, I can be angry, I can be excited. But inside me, there's a sense of peace. And so that's the okay. It's okay to be okay. Not to, so it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be depressed. It's okay to be anxious, but it's not okay to stay there. So and that's what I'm trying to help. It's okay, embrace it. But now don't just stay there, because that's when you can get into the rumination, get stuck in the quicksand. You want to be able to reach out and, throw get the help, get the vine, so you can pull yourself out the quicksand. And that's where the embrace, process, and reconceptualize. It's very important that we follow through with all those steps. And what worries me a lot in this current world is that we're sort of saying to people, it's okay to be okay. But then you're also telling them, no, it's not okay to be okay, because you're supposed to be happy, and that's a mental disease and you need treatment, and there's something wrong with you and you're broken. And so the message is very confusing for people. If I'm not happy, I'm broken.
Yeah.
And then in between it, we've got this, it's okay to not be okay, embrace your feelings. But then I embrace my feelings and I feel worse because I don't know what to do with them. What's missing, Jeff, is that we need to tell ourselves, okay to be okay, embrace it, but don't stay there. Process and reconceptualize how you're going to move forward, how we're going to progress forward. And that's really what I want to try and help people understand, is don't just get stuck.
Well, you're doing it beautifully. And as I called you before we started, you are a translator in some ways between kind of the more empirical science and in a vocabulary that people can really relate to and apply to their own life. So I'm so grateful for all of your work. And I know a lot of people are too. So thanks so much, Caroline.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I really love thank you for those kind words. And I've loved our discussion. We got into some deep, good stuff.
Yeah. Well, great luck with this book. It's wonderful. Help in a Hurry. Number 19.
Yes.
Well done.
Thank you.
And I look forward to number 20.
Thank
All
you. Thanks, Jeff.
To be continued.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. Dr. Leaf's new book, Help in a Hurry, is out this Tuesday, August 5th, wherever you get your books. And I want to let you know about our Commune course platform that contains over 3,000 lessons and practices from the world's preeminent integrative medicine doctors, health experts, and fitness, yoga, and mindfulness teachers. It is a repository of recipes for holistic well-being. So check it out for free at onecommune.com/try commune. And for more of my weekly musings, like today's episode on health and culture, ad-free episodes of this show, and live stream conversations, head over to my Substack at jeffkrasno.substack.com. As a reminder, the audio version of my new book, Good Stress, is available on Audible, and you can listen to it for free as part of your premium Spotify membership. Now, if you prefer the old school analog option, you can purchase a dusty old scroll at goodstress.com and get a bunch of goodies thrown in, including $900 worth of courses with some of my biggest influences, including Dr. Mark Hyman, Dr. Zach Bush, and of course, Dr. Gabor Mate. Feel free to reach out to me any old time with comments, questions, and criticism of the constructive variety at jeffk@onecommune.com. Okay, that's all from the Commune for today. My name is Jeff Krasno, and I'm here for you.